We got more quarterback contract news a couple of weeks ago with the Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love deals, which of course then brought the predictable extreme reactions by the internet. But for me, it's not so much about the dollars and cents. This is simply where we're at with franchise quarterback compensation. The market value is the market value. The surprise to me was the timing. I simply do not understand it for either player. We'll start with Tua. I have no idea what the Miami Dolphins front office has been strategizing or what the calculations have been throughout this entire process. I've been running through scenarios in my head, but the only one that feels like it makes sense to me is they just didn't expect the Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence contracts to happen this offseason, or at least not in the amounts that we've seen. And in fairness, hindsight is 2020, so it's easy for me to sit here and play armchair general manager. But the question I have is why the Dolphins didn't offer the extension to Tua late last season. And we'll get to how this impacts the cap in a minute, but strictly in terms of the timing here, if they offered Tua in, say, December of last season, the price they paid would have been lower. We'll get into the details on contract structure, but I think it's very likely that instead of the 53.1 average annual value for Tua, you probably could have gotten him somewhere at, say, between 45 to 50 per year. I realize that may not sound like a lot, right? I mean, you'd still be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of a $200 million extension. But I don't see how Tua comes in at the rate we just saw if that deal would have been signed last year. These were the circumstances leading up to Tua signing this deal. He plays all 17 games last year, finishes the regular season leading the league in passing yards. The Dolphins make the playoffs. We get the news at the start of the league year that the new salary cap increases by about 13%. Kirk Cousins signs a deal at age 36, coming off a torn Achilles, for $180 million, which on a per-year basis comes out to $45 million. Jared Goff then signs an extension that is paying him $53 million per year. Then Trevor Lawrence is extended at $55 million per year, and that one is for 5 years. Now you put yourself in Tua's shoes, given all of what I just mentioned, of course the guy is going to want his money. And if you are the Dolphins, what exactly about Tua's play has changed since late last regular season? Because I don't see anything. He was playing very well in 2023, putting up big numbers, receivers making explosive plays, offenses moving along. In fact, if you look at 2022, outside of the injuries and the games he missed, he looked much like the same player that season as well. So if you get to December 2023, you've basically seen close to 2 full seasons of Tua in this Mike McDaniel offense. You know who he is and what he can be for your franchise. And as of December 2023, let me give you a quick who's who of the quarterbacks at the top of the earnings list, in terms of AAV. Joe Burrow, $55 million. Mahomes, $52.7. Herbert, $52.5. Lamar, $52. Jalen Hurts, $51. And those players' accomplishments, again, as of 2023, Burrow had won 5 playoff games by then, took his team through Arrowhead and Mahomes in an AFC title game, was on the doorstep of a Super Bowl win against the Rams in his second year in the league, and then nearly does it again the very next season in that late hit out of bounds game. Mahomes, multiple-time league MVP, multiple-time Super Bowl champion, and Super Bowl MVP, played in 3 Super Bowls overall, and oh, by the way, the 2 seasons in his career as a starter that the Chiefs haven't played in or won the Super Bowl were two narrow losses in AFC Championship games. One was to Joe Burrow, as previously mentioned, and the other, Thomas Edward Brady. Justin Herbert, not much you can point to here in terms of team accomplishment because Brandon Staley. I mean, I'm not going to crush Herbert for his only playoff game being a loss after a 24-point lead is blown in the second half by a defense led by a head coach who is supposedly a defensive wizard. Not to mention all of the coaching, let's call them poor decisions or minus decisions that cost the Chargers multiple games during Staley's tenure as their coach. Lamar Jackson already had a league MVP and was, by December of last year, pretty much a lock to win another, which he then did. Not to mention a truly unique player. Jalen Hurts had taken his team to the playoffs every year as a starter, nearly wins that Super Bowl against Mahomes and the Chiefs. And let's call it what it is. Since they entered the NFL, Jalen Hurts is viewed by, he is the better player when you compare him and Tua. That is how it is seen, which is somewhat ironic because Tua, of course, replaced Hurts in that national title game, which ultimately springboarded Tua into this college football phenomenon, can't miss prospect, tank for Tua, and Hurts ultimately transferring to Oklahoma and then becoming a second-round pick. The reason I say all of that is to frame up how much easier it could have been for Miami to make an offer in the range I previously specified with plenty of comps to leverage. And I don't think it would have been met with much resistance at the time. If you are Tua in December 2023, you go, wow, less than 1 year ago, I couldn't stay on the field because I kept getting tossed around and was missing games with concussions. Now they're offering me $195 million extension? Okay, where do I sign? And the reason I put this on Greer and Stephen Ross and the Dolphins organization is you cost yourself a lot of cap money that could be allocated elsewhere as a result of your indecision on this. You literally paid $20 to $25 million more for the same player simply because of the timing. That's basically the equivalent of a first-round draft pick's entire rookie contract. And to be clear, they don't lose an actual draft pick. Been there, done that with the Tom Brady back-channeling a few years ago. But think about that. They may be able to keep Van Ginkel instead of losing him to Seattle, or have some extra coin to sign a solid contributor in free agency. Now, I don't think they would have been able to keep Christian Wilkins, but this was a miscalculation by the Dolphins, and it was completely avoidable. Speaking of miscalculations, brings me to my next point. Why now on Jordan Love if you are Green Bay? The whole purpose of signing Love to that mini extension they did back in 2023 was to protect against this exact scenario. They played it perfectly from an organizational standpoint at the time. Quite the opposite of the New York Giants, if you recall our previous episode about passing on Daniel Jones' fifth-year option. And look at the Giants situation now. An elite running back in the league, arguably your best player on the team, now plays just down the I-95 for a division rival. And you're paying big money to a quarterback that has been terrible for 4 of the 5 seasons he's been in the league. Green Bay passed on the fifth-year option for Love, which would have been guaranteed for this upcoming year at about, call it $20 million. And at the time, that was the right move. Looking back at it, the Giants should have done something similar once they decided not to pick up the 5th year on Jones. But what the Packers did with Love was in spring 2023, when it was apparent Aaron Rodgers was going to become a Jet, Green Bay signed Love to a 1-year extension instead of picking up his 5th year. Remember, we had only seen Jordan Love in a limited capacity his first few years in the league, and he was awful. There was nothing to suggest he was going to become a franchise quarterback. So what Green Bay did was smart, and quite frankly, a nice deal for Jordan Love as well. The deal gave him an opportunity to make a few extra dollars in incentives and a fully guaranteed $13.5 million. I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's a massive floor for a player who just doesn't seem to have it. But still, 13.5 guaranteed was a lot less than 20, which the fifth year would have been on Jordan Love. And let's be real, halfway through last season, it felt like even the guaranteed money was too much. Midway through last season, I want to say Love's stats were something along the lines of 2,000-ish yards, a bad touchdown to interception ratio, and he was completing less than 60% of his passes. I can guarantee you that even Packers fans were thinking, wait, this is our guy? We owe him another $13 million next year? AKA he's going to be the quarterback again in 2024? And I'm talking about even the fans who were done with Aaron Rodgers and his drama and who were ready for a change. And then, all of a sudden, Jordan Love transforms into a different player for the second half of last year. The guy went nuts. And ironically, anyone remember what the inflection point was last season? That would be the aforementioned Brandon Staley and that pathetic Chargers defense. And then the next game after that, the Packers go into Detroit on Thanksgiving and absolutely work the Lions. And that just really got them rolling. Now, they did have a terrible loss to the Giants in that Monday night game, but Jordan Love was otherwise great down the stretch run. In that 9-game span, starting with the Chargers, Love had 19 touchdowns against just one interception. One interception in 9 games. He also added a couple of rushing scores during that time as well. The lone interception happened to come in that Giants loss. And then he had 2 against San Francisco, in the divisional game. The second one, which ultimately did them in. But there's no denying it. We all saw it. Love looks like he could have a long career ahead of him. And if he plays the way he did in the second half of last season, sky's the limit. But I also can't look past the amount of similarities in the career arcs between, the Giants and Daniel Jones and, Packers, Jordan Love. Big-time athletes, prototypical quarterback size at 6'4", 6'5", 225, 230. Both guys can hurt you with their legs. Both had a terrible grade through their first 3 years. Sentiment was negative. That's more than fair to say. Then they come alive in year 4. They both win a wild card game as road underdogs in that 4th season. Then they get huge contracts. And I do realize there are some differences in there as well, right? I mean, Daniel Jones was the number 6 overall pick in 2019, expected to be good right away, whereas Love went, 30th, in that 2020 draft. Then he sat behind Rodgers for 3 years. You could also say there was an unfair draft bust label placed on Love. People were holding it against him that the Packers drafted him in 2020 instead of an offensive, lineman or a skill guy to put around Aaron Rodgers. That is not Jordan Love's fault. He also only started 1 game in his first 3 years, way back in 2021 at Arrowhead against the Chiefs, whereas Daniel Jones was the full-time starter from day 1 for New York. But again, the timing of this. While Love has a relatively low cap hit at just under $21 million for 2024, he will be paid $79 million in cash this year. Now that drops to $13 million in cash in 2025, and then shoots back up to $51 million in 2026. So that is about $143 million in money paid to the player in the next 3 years. Jordan Love's cap hit for those same 3 years only totals about $87 million. So by the end of 2026, that leaves a gap of about $66 million between the money the Packers paid out to Jordan Love and what they will have charged against their salary cap. Then I look to 2027, which is the first year of this new deal without guaranteed money. Well, for that season, cash paid to Love and his cap charge are about the same. Both come in at about $43 million, which means you still have about $66 million to account for in the event he plays out the 2027 season as currently constructed. So with this extension, you have a situation where the Packers have committed to having Jordan Love as their starter for the next 4 years. I would expect that if things go well, we would then very likely see a restructure after the 2026 season. That is the positive scenario. But if things go south, or if somehow Love's play going forward is just nowhere near the value of the contract, it puts the Packers in a tough spot. It would put them in almost a Denver Broncos Russell Wilson-esque scenario. And remember, the Packers aren't owned by the Walmart people. So I'm not sure just how quickly they would cut bait and absorb a dead cap hit of over $60 million. Even with what seems to be an ever-increasing salary cap, that is a massive amount. Remember, dead cap ultimately is the amount of money you cannot use in, a given year's salary cap. That would be extremely difficult to overcome and still have success on the field. So I'm looking at this deal as basically, we're paying our hopefully franchise quarterback, so now he's happy, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do on cap manipulation 3 years from now. I hope I'm still getting to talk to you all 3 years from now, but mark it down. Whether Love continues this absurd, nearly 40-year streak of elite-level Packers quarterback play, or he turns into Daniel Jones, this deal is not going into 2027 as is. Thanks for listening.